Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. I hope you're all doing super well. So welcome to today's video. I'm going to start off with a trigger warning because this case involves infant abuse and domestic violence, which is very difficult to hear. I know it cannot be easy, and it wasn't easy for me to research this or, listen to this because it just breaks my heart anytime a young innocent baby is murdered. So it is a difficult video to listen to, but it's also super important to talk about this in order to help bring justice and bring awareness for Jacob. With that said, today we will be talking about what happened to Jacob Jeremiah Landin. The majority of the information was given to me by Jacob's older brother, Eric. He is absolutely amazing. He is such a great advocate for his brother. He actually has his own podcast called True Consequences, where he brings awareness to what happened to Jacob, as well as to other cases. So I will link his information down below so you guys can show him lots of support, and his podcast is really good, so I highly recommend you guys go listen to it. We actually had a very good conversation the other day over Zoom about what happened to his brother and, what he wanted me to include in this video. During this conversation, we actually got into the topic about ethics in true crime and, what creators can do to be more ethical and what viewers and consumers of true crime can do to also be more ethical. We actually want to make a whole separate video about this, whether it's on my podcast or, his podcast or here on the channel. So if that's something that you guys would be interested in, let me know so we can definitely set that up. But one thing he said that viewers of true crime can do is, help push out these stories and also show action. So if a family member is asking you to take action, that's something that you can do to show support and show that you're actually listening and, wanting to help the families. So please share this video, share Eric's podcast, share Jacob's story. Let's just help him get justice and get more awareness. But yeah, that's pretty much what we're going to be talking about in today's video. Thank you guys so much for being here and for taking the time to listen to what happened to Jacob. If you guys haven't checked out the latest episode of my podcast, What Happened, the newest episode is out now, so I will link it down below so you guys can listen to it here on my YouTube channel. You can watch the video version right here or listen to the audio on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. Yeah, anyways, that's pretty much all I have to say. Let's jump right into today's video. Jacob Jeremiah Landin was born on July 1st, 1986 in Texas to his mother Brenda and to his father Gene. He also has an older brother named Eric. Now, Eric and Jacob's parents were married when they were really young. I believe his mother was 17 years old and his father was 20. They actually had a firstborn named Randy who unfortunately died shortly after his birth. After their son Randy, Eric was born in 1980, and then afterwards, Jacob was born. Now, growing up, Eric remembers watching his mother Brenda struggle a lot to make ends meet as his father was not very present and he was away a lot due to work. He specifically remembers when he was 3 to 4 years old, he saw his mother crying while she was doing the dishes and he went up to her and said, "When I grow up, I'm going to be better than my dad. I'm going to take care of my family," which I think is so powerful coming from such a young boy who just wanted to see his mother happy. Sometime after, Eric found out that his mother was actually pregnant with a boy. He was so excited about this. He was excited to be an older brother. It was actually something that he had wanted for a long time. He had been praying for him to be born, so when his parents told him that it was actually happening, he just couldn't believe it. Time passed and baby Jacob was born. He was an exceptionally smart baby with an infectious laugh. His mother Brenda recalls him as a strong, happy child who loved to dance. He was wild and adventurous, always so brave and curious about everything. Everyone says that Jacob was not frightened about anything. He was funny, he liked to laugh, he liked to pull out the drawers, he was just a very silly baby. His mother Brenda says that it's ridiculous how smart Jacob truly was. His laugh was amazing and it brought her so much joy to hear it. Another thing about Jacob is that he was a big baby. He weighed 10 pounds, so he was a big boy and he just had such a big personality. Hearing his mother Brenda talk about Jacob so beautifully let us have an idea of how much Jacob was loved by his family and how special he truly was. When Jacob was about 6 months old, his father Gene and his mother Brenda decided to split up. According to Eric, his father was having an emotional connection with another woman. And when Brenda found out about that, she decided to leave him. In order to be closer to family, she decided to move with Jacob and Eric from where they were living in Texas to New Mexico. Now, this was a very big change. Eric and Jacob's father wasn't really in the picture after this, so it was pretty much just Brenda raising these two boys on her own. It was incredibly difficult, so she actually decided to move in with her parents, which helped out a lot. Now, Brenda could go to work and, help provide for her family. And while she was at work, her parents or her sisters or, other relatives would watch Jacob and Eric. Now, shortly after moving to New Mexico, Brenda started to grow closer to an old family friend. In fact, this guy was actually her ex-husband, Gene's close friend. Now, Eric asked that we do not use his real name because it could jeopardize the investigation. So, for the sake of the video, we are going to be referring to this man as Nick. So Nick's sister actually married Brenda's brother, and his aunt is actually Eric's godmother. So in a way, they all had some type of connection between their families. It's not like this guy was a complete stranger. Brenda pretty much grew up around him, and she used to attend Sunday school with Nick, go to church with him, things like that. So they had a history of knowing each other. He's actually the one that told Brenda that her husband Gene was having an emotional connection with another woman. So as soon as Nick entered their life, he immediately began love bombing Brenda. He would give Brenda, Eric, and Jacob all of this attention and affection that in that moment they so desperately wanted. Although Brenda wasn't interested in a relationship with Nick initially, he was very manipulative and he gave the type of fatherly attention to the boys that they had been longing for, such as watching movies with Eric, listening to him, making him feel comfortable, things like that. Eric says that in a way, Nick was kind of like a breath of fresh air because their father Gene had been so neglectful their entire life that in this moment, they needed this. They needed someone to give them attention and kind of be like a father figure. So because Nick was giving Eric and Jacob so much attention and affection, Eric says he really liked Nick. Nick is very charming and manipulative, and he seems like a funny, nice guy. But of course, as we'll talk about that later, that's not actually how Nick is. Eventually, his affections won Brenda over, and they moved in together to a mobile home in December of 1986. Nick was actually employed as a maintenance man for the county of Socorro, and Brenda worked as a cashier at the supermart in Socorro. But unfortunately, as quickly as he entered their lives, baby Jacob started to receive unexplained injuries. The first injury that Brenda can recall was in the beginning of March 1987. Nick's kids from his ex-wife were visiting and spending time with him while he was also taking care of Jacob and Eric. Eventually, Nick had to take his babies home, which meant leaving baby Jacob alone with Eric for a short period of time. Now, Jacob was only 6 to 7 months old, which is a huge responsibility for Eric, who was only 6 years old. And it's a very dangerous thing to do. You should not leave a baby and a child unattended, even if it's just for a short period of time. Anything could happen in that short time. So in an interview with Eric and Jacob's father, Gene, he said that he actually received a phone call from Nick's ex-wife, and she told him that he should file a child abuse complaint after Nick left Jacob and Eric alone in the house. But no complaint was ever made. Now, the following day, Brenda noticed that Jacob had a skinned ear, and she actually took him to the doctor. And trying to figure out what happened, Nick told Brenda that Eric was responsible because he was jealous of Jacob. He says that there had been other times where he noticed that Eric was jealous of his baby brother, so that he was probably the one that injured his brother. After questioning Eric for a while, and after hearing Nick say Eric did it, Brenda was able to get Eric to admit that he had taken Jacob out of his crib and dropped him, which doesn't really check out because Eric was 6 years old. Now, for a 6-year-old to reach over a crib and pick up a 6 to 7 month old baby that weighs 10 pounds and, just drop him is pretty bizarre. It just doesn't seem logical. Now, as of now in 2023, Eric says that he does not recall this day at all because, again, he was only 6 years old. Can you guys honestly recall what you were doing when you were 5, 6 years old? Probably not. As for Nick claiming that Eric was jealous of his baby brother Jacob, Eric says that he has no memory of that happening either. It's possible he was jealous of his new brother because, that's somewhat normal when it comes to siblings, but jealous to the point where he would want to hurt his brother? No. On top of that, Brenda said that she had never seen any signs of Eric being jealous that he had a new brother or anything like that. So this was just something that Nick had pretty much made up on his own. Now, the second injury occurred about 2 to 3 weeks later. One night, Jacob was being fussy, so his mother gave him some medicine so he would go back to sleep. The following day, Brenda's mother, Merlinda, felt a lump on Jacob's head, and she immediately took him to the doctor. The doctor said that this injury came from a blow to the head and that he had suffered a hematoma, which needed to be lanced and drained immediately, and that Jacob had to stay in the hospital for a few days. This is a huge injury. It's not just one that is caused by, getting a thump on your head or, accidentally falling, something like that. This type of injury in such a young baby raised red flags at the hospital, and a caseworker from Human Services came to the house and actually spoke to Brenda and the family about this. Now, what's shocking is that this worker had already had a complaint against this house. A neighbor had actually reported the house because they heard a man beating a baby inside. This caseworker went to the house to speak with Nick, but she was actually chased off the property by Nick. After that, the neighbor never heard anything else. She didn't hear again from Human Services. There was no follow-up or anything. Unfortunately, it's sad that happened, that the caseworkers never followed up with someone literally complaining that they could hear an adult beating a baby. Now, Jacob had not been very well since this head injury. He had been fussy, he was vomiting, he had an ear infection, tonsillitis, and he was also having an allergic reaction to the medicine. There was just so much going on at home, and I can't imagine how hard it was for everyone. Now, once again, Nick blamed Eric for Jacob's injury. He actually told Brenda that Eric kicked Jacob in the head and that he saw Eric do this, which is just crazy to me. Like, my heart breaks for Eric. Imagine being blamed for all of these horrible things happening to your little brother. Again, Eric was super young at this point, and I think he was only 6 years old, so he has no memory of whether he actually kicked Jacob or if he didn't. Those were the words coming out of Nick's mouth and what he is claiming happened, but there really is no proof or any other witnesses that can attest to Eric kicking his baby brother Jacob in the head. On top of that, even if he did kick Jacob, Eric says that there's no way he would have the force and the strength to make such a big injury on Jacob's head. So it's all just very crazy. After all of this went down, Brenda made the decision to call Eric's father, Gene, who lived in Indio, California, and she asked Gene if he would take custody of Eric. She just felt like maybe Eric wasn't getting enough attention at the house, and she was working a lot, she had baby Jacob to take care of. It was just a lot. So at this moment, she felt like Eric was acting out and that the best thing to do was to send him to live with his father in California. But unfortunately, Jacob was still being injured even when Eric, the one who was supposedly doing all of this, was in another state with his father. This is when Brenda started suspecting that Nick was perhaps the cause of the injuries Jacob had received. And then on Thursday, April 9th, 1987, Brenda was scheduled to work the 11 a.m. to 7:30 p.m. shift at the supermart, and she left Jacob in the care of her mother, Merlinda, who was taking care of him the majority of the time after Brenda suspected that Nick was involved in the injuries to Jacob. And at this point, Brenda was really starting to worry about what would happen if Nick was alone with Jacob. She made sure that any time she had to go to work or leave the house, someone would be there to watch Jacob that wasn't Nick. If Merlinda couldn't take care of him, if her sisters and other relatives couldn't watch Jacob, then she would rearrange her schedule just to make sure that Jacob was never alone and that someone would always be watching him. However, on this day, Merlinda wanted to go to church. This service started before Brenda got off work, and Merlinda didn't want to bring baby Jacob to church with her. So she called Brenda, she told her about this plan, and Brenda said that it was okay for her mother to go to church, even though she didn't really want her to because that meant that she wouldn't be able to watch Jacob. But she agreed to this, and she told her mom that she could drop Jacob off at Nick's house since she was almost done with her shift, and once she was off, she would go pick him up. Brenda thought, what's the worst that can happen in an hour? Nothing can really happen that quickly. So she agreed, and Merlinda took Jacob to the house at around 6 p.m. Now, Brenda started to get a weird feeling. She just felt like something was going to happen. So she actually asked her manager if she could get off work early and, leave to go see her baby. But her manager said no, that the store was going to get busy soon, so she couldn't leave. About an hour later at 7 p.m., Nick arrived at the supermart that Brenda worked at in complete distress and said that Jacob was in the ambulance and that he wasn't breathing. He said Jacob had fallen off the couch. They immediately both left to the hospital where Jacob was initially taken to in Socorro. However, at the last minute, it was decided to transfer Jacob to the University of New Mexico Hospital in Albuquerque to better treat him. That's how severe his injuries were. Jacob was in a coma and he had significant injury to the brain and he was bleeding in the cranial vault. He also had some increased pressure and he was very close to hemorrhaging. Jacob then went into emergency surgery. He was placed on a police hold in protective custody to prevent Jacob from being returned to the house until, further investigation was completed due to the severity of his injuries and all the previous hospital visits he had. Unfortunately, between 3:34 a.m. and 3:45 a.m. on April 10th, 1987, Jacob passed away. He had become unstable during surgery and doctors were unable to bring him back. When the doctors notified Brenda and Nick, Brenda ran out of the room hysterical after hearing the news, which is a completely normal reaction to hearing that your baby child has just passed away. It truly is heartbreaking. The doctors also explained that Jacob was already near death when he arrived and that they couldn't save him. I just can't imagine the pain that Brenda was going through in that moment. No mother should ever experience the death of their baby. However, when Brenda left the room, the doctor began speaking to Nick and he noticed that Nick seemed very nervous. Why would Nick seem nervous and why wouldn't he seem heartbroken after learning that this baby had just died? Nick actually told the doctor, quote, "This is going to make me look real bad," which is a super sketchy thing to say after learning such horrible news. Why did he say that? Now, meanwhile, Eric is in California with his father when he gets woken up with the news that something had happened to Jacob. They packed quickly and they headed to New Mexico. Upon arriving, Jean and Eric were questioned by investigators and, Eric says that in a way, he felt that his brother's death was his fault. Police were asking him if he had ever kicked Jacob, if he had ever hit Jacob, things like that. They also asked him if Brenda's boyfriend, Nick, had ever hit him. Eric said no, but that he acts like he's going to all the time. Now, at this point when he's being questioned, Eric does not know that his brother has passed away. So he's getting asked all of these, intense questions, and according to detectives, he was getting agitated. But I feel like that's normal. At this point, Eric was 6 years old, so imagine being asked those type of questions by police. I feel like I would get agitated and nervous as well. Eric actually told his mom that he was scared he was gonna go to jail. Now, he's also confused because Eric was in California when all of these injuries occurred to Jacob, so obviously he wasn't the one that caused these injuries, but yet he was still being questioned about it. It was just a lot to take in, and then Eric learned that his brother had passed away. It was the worst thing that Eric could have heard. His baby brother was gone, and he didn't even get the chance to say goodbye. Now, when Brenda was questioned about whether she believed Nick could have done this, she said no, that she didn't really think so. However, she would say differently 2 years later. But before we get into that, let's talk about what happened after all of this went down. After all of this went down, Brenda broke things off with Nick, and her and Eric decided to move back into her parents' house. And Nick did not take this very well. He kept trying to get in contact with Brenda, and he even showed up to her parents' house one day. He also tried to see her, and he was trying to manipulate her by telling her that he would tell her the truth of what actually happened to Jacob only if she would meet him at Jacob's graveyard. That is just such a messed up thing to say, and I can't imagine how hard it must have been for Brenda to hear this. Why would he want to meet at Jacob's gravesite, especially alone at night? Brenda has come out and said that she honestly feels like Nick wanted to kill her, and that's why he wanted to meet her all alone.
All I kept saying is, it was an accident, and meet me at the graveyard so I could talk to you. Why am I going to meet him at the graveyard when he put my son in the graveyard?
Yeah.
I'm thinking he's going to kill me over there.
Well, I read that in the investigative report, and I thought that was really weird that he, even for him.
Not just once, but over and over and over, he wanted me to go meet him at the graveyard, to talk to him at the graveyard.
That's so creepy.
That is sick.
Yeah.
Who murders somebody and then tries to take the mother of the child you murdered to the grave of the kid? That don't make sense at all. That's just what?
I can't even understand that. I'm not a psychologist or anything, but I always try to figure, I always try to think about that. What
logic is it?
I can't.
There's no logic in it.
Nothing to it. Yeah.
I think he wanted to kill me. I still think he wants to kill me, but I'm going to speak my truth no matter what. For Jacob, he didn't have a voice, and he deserves one. And I couldn't, for the longest time, even talk about it.
Now, after dealing with all of this and the constant harassment from Nick, Brenda changed her mind and her story. She now wanted criminal charges filed against Nick for beating her son, Jacob Landin, to death. But unfortunately, when she tried to make this happen, the district attorney said that he wouldn't file criminal prosecution due to the inconsistencies in her statements. Now, Brenda eventually did get back together with Nick. And I know this might be very confusing to you guys and you might not understand why this happened, but please try to be respectful in the comment section because Eric and Brenda and other family members will, maybe read the comment section. And we just need to be respectful of the family and just not try to judge without understanding why this happened.
Hey friends, Eric Landin here. I hope you're doing well. Today I want to talk about victim blaming. It is a huge problem in the true crime community and it's something that has been bothering me for a long time. I think that a lot of what victim blaming is, it's people distancing themselves from horrible, tragic situations. For example, my mom, who was in a domestic abuse situation, she gets blamed a lot for the actions of her ex-husband, who was very violent and very abusive and killed my brother. I think it's because people don't want to admit that they could fall into that same situation. And so they say things about the victim in order to make their psyche feel better about what they just learned. That's just my 2 cents.
So I spoke to Eric about this, and he says that his mom initially believed that Jacob's death was an accident. I mean, no one wants to believe that their child was actually murdered and that someone would do this to a baby. But even after realizing that this most likely wasn't an accident, she says that she stayed close to Nick so that she might find out what actually happened. And she eventually married him. Brenda said that she was married to Nick for 3 years and that during that time, she was verbally and physically abused by Nick. She also said that Eric was abused by Nick, and it was just a lot. It's very difficult to leave a manipulative person, and understandably, Brenda was trying to get the truth of what actually happened to her son, and she was willing to do anything to get it. A mother's love has no limitations or buts.
Why did you stay with him after that?
The only thing that I cared about is finding out what happened to my son. I didn't care about anything else. I just wanted to know the truth. I wanted to know what happened to Jacob. And I stayed with him because, like I said, I wanted to hurt him, like the way he hurt me. And my mind wasn't right, and I wasn't thinking right. And if I would have ever known he was like that, I would have never, ever been around him. But I didn't know he hid it so good.
Yeah.
He told me everything I wanted to hear. He was so charming and such a con artist that I really thought he loved me. He didn't love me. He just wanted to use me and, keep that over my head for 3 years.
Now, on top of that, Nick had also done a polygraph test in Santa Fe, which Eric and his mother had actually gone to with him. They didn't go inside the polygraph exam, because that's not allowed. But when Nick walked out of the police station, he told them that he passed. And he wasn't arrested or detained, he was allowed to leave. So, Eric and his mother felt like he was telling the truth. If he had failed the test, he probably wouldn't be walking free, right? Now, as for why she married Nick, Brenda says that Nick told her that he had just gotten some new health insurance and that he claimed Brenda as his wife, even though they actually were not married. He told her that he would go to jail if she didn't get married to him. And again, I just want to emphasize that this guy is very manipulative and deceiving. I know we probably don't understand it, but we weren't in Brenda's shoes at the time, so we have no idea what was going on in her mind. Now, the day of Jacob's death, Nick has a few stories as to what happened, and we're not really sure what's actually the truth. He first says that he placed Jacob on a couch, which had a coffee table in front of it, and that he heard gasping noises, and when he turned around, Jacob was on the floor lying sideways between the couch and the coffee table. He said he gave Jacob CPR and he took him to the neighbor's house to call paramedics since he didn't have a cell phone. The doctors said that in their opinion, the injuries that Jacob received could not have been from falling off the couch, couch. And when he told Nick this, Nick just responded with, "I would never hit the child." But the doctor just had a feeling that Nick was acting more concerned for himself than for Jacob, and that's not what he expected from someone that had just, lost a baby. The doctor stated that the primary reason Jacob died was from a pulmonary edema, which was due to the head injury. He said it's common for, the lungs to fill up when you have such a severe head injury, and he said very clearly that there would not have been enough force from a fall from a couch to cause this type of head injury. Now, the autopsy report conducted showed that Jacob died due to a subdermal hematoma, which is a blood clot between the brain and the dural membrane, which compressed the brain and then caused irreversible damage. This autopsy also revealed that there was evidence of an old, partially healed subdermal hematoma, as well as a partially healed skull fracture and a healing fracture on the ribs. There was a microscopic study of all of the healing injuries, and this indicated that these happened 3 to 4 weeks prior, which wouldn't have been Eric since he was in California living with his father. So that leaves only Nick, Nick being responsible for all of these injuries on baby Jacob. God, it just breaks my heart. Like, even just saying this right now makes me so angry, because how can you just abuse a defenseless young baby, someone that can't defend themselves? It's disgusting, and only those type of injuries can be associated with child abuse. On April 12, 1987, Nick was being interviewed, and he was still denying ever hurting Jacob, and that's when the police decided to schedule a polygraph test to occur on April 15th. However, when April 15th came around, the polygraph test was actually canceled as a confession by Nick was made. Now, unfortunately, we don't know exactly what he said in this confession. In the police report, there is no mention as to what Nick confessed to and under what circumstances. He also wasn't even arrested after making a confession, which is very frustrating. How can there be no details as to what he confessed to? How is there no recording of what he said? And why wasn't he arrested? I mean, I just don't really understand how this happened and why he was just let go. However, on July 9th, 1987, another polygraph test was conducted, and it concluded that Nick was not being truthful. Now, this is a test that I mentioned earlier. Remember, Nick told Brenda and Eric that he had passed the polygraph test, but that actually was a lie. He failed it, but for some reason, again, he wasn't arrested or detained in that moment. Now, Nick admitted to being untruthful to investigators when they first questioned him, because allegedly his mental faculties were impaired. Nick said he wasn't being truthful due to his fear of rejection of Brenda, and he said that he felt the death was accidental. He then went on to explain that on April 9th, 1987, the day Jacob died, Jacob was in a standing position holding himself onto the wooden armrest of a chair inside the living room. He has given so many versions of what actually happened that day, so again, just take what he says with a grain of salt. Now, these versions can range from Jacob being fussy and falling off the couch, or Jacob lying on top of Nick and then choking and hitting his head, to then Jacob, hitting his head on the armchair of a sofa. So again, there's a few stories that Nick has told about what actually happened to Jacob, and to this day, we just don't really know what actually happened or what's the truth. However, a pathologist said that the blow Jacob suffered most likely came from the strike of an open hand with severe force. Now, when asked why he has lied about what happened so many times, Nick says that he's lying because he feared that Brenda's dad and that, Jacob's dad threatened to shoot him. And he also feared Brenda would not marry him if he told the truth about what actually happened. He also said that he felt like a worthless father. Now, on top of all of that, he also mentioned that a detective had also threatened him. And when asked about the questions that he failed from the polygraph test, Nick said that the polygrapher said that the machine was not working properly and that he was totally out of it. Nick stated that he had taken some allergy medication earlier that day before the test, and he doesn't remember being asked any of those questions, which just seems a little too convenient for him to say that he doesn't remember what he was asked. Now, I know that's a lot to take in. There's a lot of information for this case, but, unfortunately, time went by with no updates on Jacob's murder. No one knew what truly happened, and I just can't imagine how frustrating and, sad the family was. Eventually, Brenda did divorce Nick, and all she wanted was answers. She wanted the truth of what actually happened to her baby Jacob. So she went over to speak with the district attorney at the time, and she gave the DA several demands. First, she wanted the case and Jacob's death to be reopened, and she wanted Nick to be investigated once again. However, However, the case was not reopened. Years later, on Thursday, April 14th, 2005, when Eric was older and was able to help his mom, Brenda sent an urgent email to the Albuquerque, New Mexico State Police Criminal Investigation Section saying that she has done everything in her power to seek justice in the case, but that nothing has been done. This is a cop-out since the suspect failed the lie detector test and confessed to 2 different officers. To me, this is not a lack of evidence. Socorro County Police are negligent and they do not care that this person has never been punished and is probably still hurting innocent children. I did not have this information until 1990, but the DA's office did, yet they did not do their job. Now, upon receiving this email, the sergeant in charge of attempting to get the DA to reopen this case told Brenda that he would review everything and that he would submit this file to the district attorney, and after that, a decision of where the investigation would go would be decided. Upon reviewing everything, this sergeant did see that there was enough evidence to prosecute at the time and that he didn't know why this wasn't set in motion. Why Nick was still free if there was all this evidence to show that he was abusing Jacob. However, it wasn't until 2 years later in 2007 that the sergeant had received word from the district attorney. And this district attorney said that there is insufficient evidence at the time to proceed with a felony prosecution. The extreme age of the matter, coupled with the statute of limitations, which was in effect at the time of Jacob Landin's death, would by itself make it impossible to proceed with the prosecution in this case. No evidence was maintained or seized during the investigation. This case is now considered closed. Yeah, that's what they told the family. And unfortunately, to this day, Nick remains free. Eric currently lives in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and he holds an MBA from Western New Mexico University. He is fighting so hard to get justice for his baby brother. He actually has a petition open, which I will link down below. On this petition, he says, quote, "New Mexico has failed to hold child abusers and child murderers accountable for decades, and it needs to stop. A message needs to be sent that we will not tolerate the abuse of children in this state. Please help me by signing this petition to get the attention of the district attorney." Now, according to Eric, the case has been reopened. So, they closed it years ago in 2007, but now it's actually reopened, but it's moving very slowly. Like nothing much has happened. Nick is still out there, out and about, free, living his life as if nothing happened. It's been 36 years, you guys. 36 years since Jacob was murdered, and to this day, he has not received justice. It's not fair, it's not right, and Eric and his mother need this closure. They need justice, and they will never give up fighting for Jacob. Now, there is a Facebook page where Eric posts updates, photos, and news about Jacob, which I will link below as well. He also has this podcast that he created, which I mentioned at the start of the video. The podcast is called True Consequences, and he was specifically focusing on unsolved cases in New Mexico, but he's kind of branched out now and done, cases outside of New Mexico. But it's a really good podcast. He said that he started it kind of as a, love letter to Jacob and as a way to honor him. I highly recommend that you guys listen to it. He has merch, he has a Patreon. If you want to support him and his podcast, I will link all of that down below. Now, his mother Brenda is in support of Eric, and she's actually been on Eric's podcast where they talk about what happened to Jacob. I highly recommend you guys listen to his 3-part series on his brother because it was really good, very emotional. God, it's just hard because my heart breaks for Brenda because I feel like a lot of people blame her and they're so rude to her, but again, we weren't in her shoes and we don't understand what was going through her mind at this time. So on the podcast, Brenda said, quote, "I just think if this story touches even one life, if it helps even one person not to have to go through what we did, it would be worth telling. My heart goes out to the Landin family. I am so sorry that this happened to you. I am so sorry that this happened to baby Jacob. And I stand with you in trying to get justice for Jacob. My thoughts and prayers are with you. And thank you so much, familia, for listening to today's video. Please make sure to go show support to Eric, to Brenda, to all the family members involved in this because it's a lot. I mean, so many years have passed by without justice or any type of movement in the investigation. The fact that growing up, Eric had to deal with being blamed for what happened to his baby brother, for being accused of kicking his brother, hitting him on the head, being jealous of him, all of these horrible things. And then, his brother was murdered and he didn't even get the chance to say goodbye to him. It's a lot, and I just can't imagine what Eric has been through, all these years. So let's definitely show him lots of love and support. Again, thank you, Eric, for helping me make this video. I truly appreciate it, and I hope this video reaches a new audience and there's new eyes on the case. Now, there is a GoFundMe open, and the goal of this GoFundMe is to raise enough money to hire a private investigator. Eric's family really wants this to happen because they feel like the PI will help move the case forward and, get new information that the family doesn't have. So I will definitely be making a donation to the GoFundMe, and I'll link it down below so you guys can donate if you're able to. If not, don't worry, you can also help by just sharing this video, sharing the case, and just spreading the word. Eric is actually starting a nonprofit organization soon. It hasn't launched yet, but the goal of this nonprofit is to grant money to families that need justice and need help getting it. So if they need money to get, DNA testing done, or they need money to help put up billboards, things like that, this organization will help with that. According to Eric, as soon as Nick heard that the case is reopened, he kind of just went into hiding. He's completely disappeared. No one has any idea where he is or what he's doing now. But I'm like, the fact that he's keeping up with the case and is in hiding really just shows a lot. If he actually didn't do this, if he didn't hurt baby Jacob, why wouldn't he try to, come out, speak his truth? It's just crazy to me that this guy was attacking and injuring an innocent baby, a little newborn baby. Like, I just don't understand why anyone would do this. I mean, if he did do this, he truly is evil, and I just hope that the family does hire this private investigator so they can dig further into this and get justice. But all right, you guys, that's pretty much all the information I have for today's video. I know it was very difficult to listen to, and I wish that there was a better ending to this. I wish that Jacob had never been killed in the first place, but I also wish that the person responsible for this was arrested and charged and punished for what he did. I will definitely keep you guys posted on what happens, if there's any new movements in the case, things like that. And if you guys have your own true crime podcast, channel, TikTok, anything, and you want to talk about what happened to baby Jacob, please reach out to Eric on Twitter. He's asking that if anybody wants to cover this case, that they speak to him directly. That way, the research and the information can be as accurate as possible. So I will link Eric's TikTok and Instagram and, all of his socials down below so you guys can reach out to him if you want to work with him on a video. Also, let me know if you guys are interested in seeing a video about the ethics in true crime featuring Eric. I'm not perfect either. There's definitely things that I can improve and work on. So I feel like making that video will be very helpful for people that want to start a true crime channel or have a true crime channel and want to be more ethical, as well as viewers, what we can do to not, consume true crime thinking that this is like a fun story, because it's not a fun story. We're talking about the worst day in people's lives. It's not something that should be taken lightly. So yeah, let me know if you guys want to see him on the podcast. I think that would be really good. So yeah, once again, thank you guys so much for being here. If you haven't listened to the new episode of my latest podcast, make sure to go check it out by clicking the link down below. Let me know if there's ever any other cases you want me to cover, and I will see you all in the next video. Bye guys.